Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the most high-leverage insights from complex research, turning dense theory into practical knowledge you can apply right now. Today, we are taking a long, hard look at a figure who, despite being largely unknown outside of management circles, fundamentally rewrote the rules for how leaders, employees, and institutions interact. Chester Barnard.
That's right.
And he's one of those figures where, once you get your head around his ideas, you start seeing them everywhere.
Absolutely. Our sources today trace his journey from, the trenches of corporate life to the very top of organizational theory. And what makes Barnard so unique, and frankly, what makes his work so powerful, is that he wasn't an academic theorizing from a distance.
No, not at all.
Oh.
This was a man who climbed the ranks at Bell Telephone. He started as a statistician.
And eventually became the president of New Jersey Bell. Then he led the Rockefeller Foundation. I mean, this was a hugely successful executive who distilled decades of actual messy day-to-day management practice into a timeless theoretical framework. And that background, that constant immersion in real-world friction, is really the key to understanding his lasting impact. Our mission in this deep dive is to grasp his central and I'd say revolutionary thesis. Organizations are not just cold, static machines. They're not flowcharts or legal entities.
Why?
They are dynamic, delicate social systems of human cooperation. And the most provocative insight we are going to unpack today is this. Authority does not flow from the top down.
That is the ultimate mic drop, isn't it? The whole traditional image of the boss is this, absolute dictator issuing commands that must be followed simply because of their title. Barnard just looked at the world, saw how actual people behaved, and said, nope. That's not how it works.
He had to. He recognized that if organizational life were truly that simple, a pure hierarchy of command, then cooperation would be easily secured. You could just use brute force or pure economics, but it's not that simple.
Never is.
Right. His 1938 magnum opus, The Functions of the Executive, wasn't just a book. It was the intellectual foundation for what became known as the social system school of thought. You really can't understand modern organizational behavior or motivation or leadership without passing through Barnard.
So he's foundational.
Completely. He proved that if you want to ensure the stability and survival of any system, whether it's a global corporation or a small government office, you have to prioritize the human, the social, and the psychological bonds that hold it all together.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with the man himself. We mentioned his unique practitioner-theorist advantage, but let's zoom in on how that experience shaped his thinking. When he was writing, the prevailing theories were mostly rooted in efficiency things, like Frederick Taylor's scientific management.
Yeah, Taylorism, the stopwatch in the assembly line.
Exactly. But Barnard was dealing with the real-world scale of Bell, which was this immense, sprawling utility company dealing with monopolies, regulation, and massive, massive labor forces.
And that scale is so crucial. Taylorism, it focuses on the individual task and maximizing speed. Barnard was focused on the organization as a whole. He realized that managing hundreds of thousands of interconnected tasks across vast geographic regions required coordination, not just optimization.
So he was seeing the forest, not just the trees.
He was seeing the entire ecosystem. He lived through communication failures, morale crises, the constant struggle to get diverse groups of people, from engineers to switchboard operators, to align their personal subjective motives with a single objective corporate goal. It's an incredibly complex problem.
And that's what makes his theory so pragmatic.
It is. They combine this really intense intellectual rigor, he was deeply read in sociology and philosophy, with the gritty reality of executive responsibility. He really served as the critical intellectual bridge, moving management thought away from that rigid, mechanical, purely economic view of the early 20th century.
Toward the modern human-centric styles we recognize today.
Precisely. He wasn't just inventing a philosophy from thin air. He was documenting the actual necessary conditions for success that he had observed over decades of practice.
So if we strip away all the machinery and the financial spreadsheets, what is the core reason, in Barnard's view, that organizations even exist? Why do people cooperate instead of just being individuals working for themselves?
Well, the answer is elegantly simple. It's a necessity that arises from human limitation.
Limitation.
Yes, Barnard argued that we are biologically, physically, and cognitively limited. We can't possess all knowledge, we can only be in one place at one time, and our physical strength is finite. Cooperation, therefore, is the only way to overcome these inherent individual limits.
That makes perfect sense.
For instance, a single person can't build a skyscraper, right, or run a global supply chain. You can't even lift a massive stone by yourself. You have to coordinate forces. And this led him to his famous, very concise definition.
Which is?
An organization is simply a system of consciously coordinated activities or forces of two or more persons. That's it.
That concept of the system feels like it's more than just a buzzword here. It implies a kind of synergy, right?
Absolutely. It implies that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The organizational outcome is entirely different from what those two or more people could achieve working individually.
Okay, so if we accept this synergy, what precisely holds this fragile system of coordinated human forces together?
Barnard identified 3 necessary and critical elements, and they all have to be there.
Okay.
First, you must have a common purpose or goal. Everyone has to agree on the destination, even if they might disagree on the best route to get there.
Got it. Number 2.
Second, there has to be a genuine willingness to contribute. People must actively decide to put effort and sacrifice into the organization. It's a choice.
And the 3rd.
Communication. The ability for those forces and activities to be coordinated and understood. If, for example, the communication fails, then the purpose becomes unclear.
And the willingness to contribute just evaporates.
Exactly. The whole system crumbles instantly. It's that fragile.
This sets the stage beautifully for motivation. Because if you want that willingness to contribute, you really need to understand the human engine. Barnard famously challenged that classical idea of the purely economic man, the person who only works for money.
Yes. I mean, the prevailing view among his contemporaries was that management was simple. Increase pay, and you'll increase output. Barnard said that view was not just wrong, it was dangerously insufficient.
Why dangerous?
Because if people were purely rational economic calculators, organizations would be easy to manage, but they're not. People are motivated by social needs, ethical concerns, prestige, personal relationships. Money is a motivator, yes, but it is rarely the sole motivator that sustains long-term commitment.
And this brings us to what I consider the most universally applicable tool in Barnard's entire kit, the contribution satisfaction equilibrium. This is the mechanism by which organizations either thrive or dissolve.
It is the fundamental law of organizational physics. It really is. In this model, an individual will continue to contribute their effort, sacrifice personal time, adhere to necessary organizational rules. That's the contribution.
Right.
Only if the satisfaction or the rewards they receive from the organization are perceived as equal to or greater than that contribution.
And the key word there is perceived, isn't it?
It's vital. This is a subjective exchange rate. It's not based on some objective market value. It's based entirely on how the employee feels about the deal. If I feel I am sacrificing too much of my energy, my time, my sanity, and the satisfaction, whether it's pay, recognition, or just a good environment, is perceived as less valuable, then that equilibrium is shattered.
So the executive's job isn't just about maximizing the company's output. It's about constantly monitoring and adjusting these subjective input-output ratios for every single employee.
That's the art of management right there.
Because if that balance flips, if the effort starts to outweigh the perceived reward, the individual will eventually mentally check out, suffer burnout, or just walk out the door, taking their valuable cooperative force with them.
And that's exactly why he needed to expand the definition of incentive so dramatically, which takes us right into our next section. If you only rely on material rewards, you have a very, very tiny lever to adjust that massive equilibrium.
Okay, so let's get into the anatomy of that. If it's not just the paycheck, what else is in the executive's toolkit?
Well, because the executive has to maintain this positive contribution satisfaction equilibrium for maybe thousands of people, they need far more than just the ability to write a bonus check. Barnard detailed 4 distinct and very comprehensive categories of inducements. He really acknowledged that motivation is a complex, multi-layered human construct.
What's the first one? The obvious one.
The first category is the obvious one. Material incentives. This is your cash, your benefits, physical things like a company car. But for Barnard, this was only the entry point. It's just the baseline expectation for participation.
Table stakes.
Exactly. What's often more powerful, I think, and something many modern managers completely forget, are those second and third tier incentives.
Let's hear them.
The second category is non-material incentives. These are things that fulfill the individual's ego and social standing. Think about prestige, distinction, the honor of having a specific title, or the acquisition of personal influence and power within the structure.
So like being promoted to chief engineer.
Precisely. For someone working at Bell, being designated chief engineer carried significant weight, not just financially, but socially. It marked them as a person of distinction within their professional community. That's a huge reward.
So the corner office isn't just a place to work, it's a non-material incentive. It's a signal of status and worth, and it helps tilt that equilibrium in the organization's favor without requiring a single extra dollar in salary.
You've got it. The third category is physical conditions. This one is straightforward, but often really underestimated. A good, supportive work environment.
Like, is the office clean? Is it safe?
Exactly. Safety, cleanliness, having the appropriate tools, comfortable temperatures, working hours that don't completely crush the employee's personal life. A toxic, unsafe, or poorly equipped environment acts as a massive negative contribution cost. It immediately flips the equilibrium toward dissatisfaction no matter how much you're paying them.
And the last one. This one feels like the most profound.
It is. The final category is the one that truly cemented Barnard's human-centric view. Ideal benefactions. This is the highest level of motivation. It's about tapping into altruism, loyalty to the organizational mission, civic pride, patriotism, or even just the sheer intellectual pride in performing difficult work exceptionally well.
This is the why.
This is the why. This incentive is about wanting to be part of something bigger than yourself.
That's the idealism that fuels cooperation in places like NASA or nonprofits or public service organizations. If you believe the objective purpose of the organization, say, connecting every American with reliable telephone service, as it was for Bell, is inherently good, you are willing to accept lower material incentives because your spiritual satisfaction is so high.
It's an incredibly powerful force.
But let's zoom in on the social infrastructure for a moment, because Barnard also recognized the immense power of what he called general incentives, those subtle, ambient factors that grease the wheels of cooperation every single day, which you'd never find listed in a formal benefits package.
Yes, these general incentives are the air people breathe in the workplace. And we're talking about things like social compatibility.
Do you like your coworkers?
Simple as that. Do you like the people you work with? Is the office culture generally fair and supportive? This is often the primary reason people choose to stay in a job or leave it, even over minor differences in pay.
It's the feeling of participation, too, isn't it? Feeling like you have a voice, that you're privy to important information, or just that your opinion on a minor process change is respected by your boss.
That's a huge one. Barnard was essentially arguing that culture and compatibility are not soft, secondary concerns. They are powerful, tangible incentives that determine the stability of the entire cooperative system. If you ignore the social environment, no amount of money will keep a talented person engaged long-term.
So this all ties back to the formal structure.
It does. This desire for stable cooperation leads us back to his 3 pillars. Barnard stated that 3 elements must be present simultaneously for a formal organization, that coordinated system to even exist.
Okay, let's recap them.
Number 1, communication. We've mentioned it, but it needs emphasis. Communication has to be effective and it has to be understood. Miscommunication is friction. Clear communication is lubrication.
Number 2.
Number 2 is willingness to serve. Now, this is the tricky one because it requires a degree of what he called depersonalization.
That sounds a little ominous.
It does, but what he means is that the individual must be willing to temporarily suppress their immediate personal desires and put the organization's goals first. It doesn't mean erasing your personality, but it does mean accepting necessary rules, hours, and tasks that serve the collective purpose.
That sounds like a heavy psychological cost for the individual. I mean, why would anyone agree to this depersonalization?
They agree because the incentives, the satisfaction outweigh the cost of that depersonalization. They accept the trade-off. But what's fascinating and quite sobering for modern leaders is a little detail he added here.
What's that?
He noted that only a very small minority of employees are ever truly positively committed to this self-sacrifice. They're the true believers. The vast majority are actually quite passive. They are simply willing to comply if the incentive equilibrium is positive enough.
So the manager's job is largely to maintain the compliance of that passive majority.
That's it. It's stark realism. You have a core group of idealists and a large field of people just waiting to see if the deal is still good for them.
Wow. Okay, and the third pillar?
And the third pillar is common purpose. That overarching goal that allows everyone to coordinate their activities in the first place.
We really need to nail down the difference between that objective common purpose and the subjective individual motive again, because it sounds like the two must be reconciled for the whole system to work.
They absolutely must.
So the purpose is impersonal. It's to manufacture high-speed rotors, or to provide emergency services. The subjective motive is personal. I work here to fund my child's education, or I gain professional status from this role.
Right. And cooperation only succeeds when the organization's objective purpose and the individual's subjective motive can align.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine a scientist whose subjective motive is to gain research prestige and publish papers, but the organization's objective purpose is proprietary patent development with zero publication allowed. The motives and the purpose are in direct conflict.
And cooperation will break down.
It will, regardless of the salary. The executive's brilliance lies in finding that point of intersection where the scientist gets their prestige, their satisfaction, and the organization gets its patent, its purpose fulfillment.
And that reconciliation is constantly being managed by a force that never appears on an org chart.
Exactly. This brings us to the hidden life of the organization, the informal organization. Barnard was one of the first major thinkers to assign such profound importance to the unofficial social structure.
So we're talking about the water cooler conversations, the friendships, the lunch cliques.
The gossip, the shared complaints.
Right. The natural grouping of individuals based on personality or proximity. They have no official status, but they have massive real-world power.
And Barnard insisted on their necessity. He said a formal organization with its rigid hierarchy and written rules cannot survive without an informal one arising within it. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
So the formal structure provides the order.
The efficiency, the goals. But the informal structure provides the life. It's the humanizing element. Think of the formal structure as the skeleton and muscles. It provides function. The informal structure is the circulatory and nervous system. It sustains the internal environment and protects human individuality from being completely crushed by the demand for that mechanical depersonalization.
So without that social support,
the rigidity of the formal rules would become unbearable and people would just quit.
it's like a psychological pressure relief valve for the entire system.
Yeah.
Okay, so what specific functions do these unofficial groups perform that are so critical to the organization's survival?
He laid out three main functions. First, they are the main engine of communication, the grapevine.
Ah, the grapevine.
Official channels are slow, they filter information, and they're often designed to protect the interests of management. The informal network is fast, it's unfiltered, and it provides essential context. Executives who try to eliminate the grapevine are just fighting human nature. They need to understand it and use it.
What's the second function?
Second, they drive cohesiveness. Informal groups enforce standards of behavior. They might establish norms about what constitutes working hard or being lazy. They help integrate new employees, and, crucially, they provide social support and a sense of belonging. That social glue is what keeps the passive majority willing to serve, even when the material incentives are maybe a little lacking.
And third, and this is where that protection comes in, they safeguard self-respect.
This is a huge one. If a manager issues an unreasonable or arbitrary command, say, asking an employee to work through lunch on a personal project, the employee can vent about it in their informal group and receive peer validation.
And that validation confirms that was an unreasonable order.
Yes.
Right.
And that protects the individual's feeling of personal integrity and self-respect against the formal system's demand for blind obedience. It creates a buffer zone. When employees feel safe and respected by their peers, they are far more resilient to the inevitable stresses and absurdities of the formal system. And that psychological resilience, paradoxically, makes the organization much stronger and more durable.
All right, this is the perfect setup. Now we arrive at the intellectual peak of Barnard's work. The idea that shocked the establishment and is still, highly debated today, the acceptance theory of authority. This idea fundamentally reverses the direction of power flow.
That's right. Traditional organizational thought, which is rooted in feudal structures and military command, says that authority flows boss, arrow, worker.
Top down.
Top down. The executive holds the power. The employee is merely the recipient of that power. Barnard just dismissed this. He argued that authority flows from the bottom up.
Say that again?
Authority, in his definition, exists only if and when the subordinate accepts the communication as authoritative. The person receiving the order is the ultimate judge of whether that order is legitimate, relevant, and executable. If they reject it, the order is merely an expression of opinion, and the authority of the superior vanishes instantly.
But wait a minute. If I, the employee, have the final say on whether I accept an order, doesn't that immediately collapse the entire corporate structure into chaos? Into anarchy. I mean, how can Bell Telephone run a massive coordinated network if every employee could just say, no thanks, I reject your authority to ask me to answer this call?
And that is the natural initial reaction. It sounds like a recipe for disaster. But Barnard addressed this risk by imposing very strict logical criteria for acceptance. He argued that refusal is not based on individual whim. It's based on whether the order meets a set of criteria designed to protect the organization's stability.
Okay, let's detail those criteria. He laid out 4 strict conditions, and the critical point here is that all 4 must be met simultaneously for the order to possess authority.
Exactly. All 4. First, the order must be understood. If the instruction is vague, contradictory, or relies on jargon the subordinate doesn't know, they can't execute it, and the authority fails right there.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Second,
the subordinate must believe the order is consistent with the organization's purpose. If a manager orders an employee to actively sabotage a company project to settle a personal grudge, that is clearly outside the organizational purpose. Authority is negated.
Okay, that's a clear one.
Third, and this is often the most contentious point, the subordinate must believe the order is compatible with their personal interests, their ethical code, or their morality, or at least that it's not actively harmful.
So if you're asked to do something illegal,
Or commit fraud, or take on some extreme uncompensated personal risk, the personal cost outweighs the satisfaction, and they have legitimate grounds for rejection.
and the 4th condition.
Fourth, they must be physically and mentally able to carry out the task. If a manager orders a junior clerk to perform complex cryptographic calculations that require an advanced degree the clerk doesn't possess, the authority fails because the employee is simply incapable.
The brilliance here is that Barnard places the responsibility for gaining compliance squarely on the executive. It's not on the employee to obey blindly.
100%. If your order is rejected, you failed to meet one of the 4 objective conditions. You failed to communicate clearly, you failed to align with purpose, you failed to protect the employee's interests, or you failed to ensure they were capable. It's your failure, not theirs.
That realization leads directly to the mechanism that prevents that organizational chaos we were worried about. The zone of indifference.
Yes. If the subordinate is always the judge, why do we obey thousands of orders every single year without even thinking? The zone of indifference is the practical answer. It is the specific range of orders that a person accepts automatically without consciously questioning those 4 conditions.
So they accept these orders because why?
Because they know they fall within the general agreement they made when they accepted the job. It's part of that contribution satisfaction contract.
So filing a routine expense report, attending a scheduled meeting, or answering a phone call, those are all comfortably within the zone.
They are. They're accepted without a second thought because the rewards, your salary, respect, job security, make the contribution, like filing a report or attending a meeting, seem trivial in comparison.
So the executive's central task in managing people is to actively expand the size of that zone of indifference.
Exactly. A happy, well-paid, respected employee, an employee with a hugely positive satisfaction equilibrium, will have a massive zone of indifference. They'll accept a far wider array of orders without question. Conversely, a poorly treated, underpaid, disrespected employee has a tiny, tiny zone, and they're ready to question every small request.
And you expand that zone using those non-material incentives we discussed earlier: respect, prestige, a good culture, belief in the ideal benefactions. It's all about minimizing the cost of compliance for the employee.
You're making it easy for them to say yes.
But let's delve into the psychology one more time. The fiction of authority. Why do we all maintain the pretense that the boss has absolute power, even when we know deep down that the power really rests with our acceptance?
Barnard saw this fiction as a necessary organizational lubricant, a social convention. First, it ensures stability. If we constantly reminded ourselves and our bosses that we could reject every order, the organization would stall in endless negotiation. Accepting the fiction allows for rapid, coordinated action.
And for the individual.
For the individual, and this is maybe the most interesting part, the fiction is psychologically convenient. By pretending the boss has absolute authority, the employee can offload the burden of responsibility.
I just did what I was told.
Precisely. When something goes wrong, they can genuinely say, I just did what I was told. If you reject the order, the responsibility for the outcome becomes yours. So this fiction allows people to avoid the constant, exhausting moral and strategic choices that come with being fully autonomous all the time.
It's an agreement, then, to temporarily suspend critical judgment for the sake of peace and stability.
It is, and for this whole system of authority, both real and fictitious, to function, communication has to be absolutely rigorous. Barnard distinguished between two sources of authority. First, we have the authority of position.
Which is?
That's the impersonal power derived purely from rank or title. The person is obeyed because of the box they occupy on the org chart.
But there's another kind.
Yes, and it's far more effective, in Barnard's view. It's the authority of leadership. This is personal authority. It's earned because the person possesses superior ability, knowledge, experience, or ethical understanding, regardless of their official rank. This is the authority of true influence.
And his rules for the communication channels themselves are incredibly strict, almost like engineering specs, designed to protect the integrity of that authority structure.
They are technical and they are vital. He demanded 4 specific communication standards. Channels must be known and definite. No ambiguity about who reports to whom. Lines should be short and direct to minimize distortion and speed up transmission. The line must be a continuous function, meaning the organizational structure can't constantly shift or be interrupted. And finally, every communication must be authenticated, verified, or signed off on to ensure it's legitimate and not some unauthorized or malicious instruction.
So authority depends completely on that structural integrity.
It's the vessel that carries it. If the vessel is cracked, the authority leaks out.
As we shift focus to the executive, we have to address Barnard's elevation of their role. It's not just a simple manager of assets, it's something much heavier. A holder of moral power. For him, this wasn't just a job, it was a deeply ethical vocation.
He fundamentally viewed executive responsibility through a moral lens. The executive operates at the nexus of internal demands from employees and external demands from shareholders, customers, the community. And this inevitably leads to constant conflict between different ethical or moral codes.
Can you give an example of that conflict?
Sure. The executive has to decide between the organizational code, which might be maximize shareholder returns, and the community code, which might be ensure environmental responsibility. Or they have to choose between the friendship code promoting a friend and the institutional code, which is promoting the most qualified person, even if they're disliked.
And true responsibility, for Barnard, wasn't about the title you held. It was about the moral fortitude to navigate that conflict.
Exactly. True responsibility is the internal power to adhere to a chosen higher moral code, the ethical code that ensures the long-term survival and health of the cooperative system, even when the individual executive internally desires an easier, more politically convenient, or personally profitable course of action. It requires immense self-control and intellectual honesty.
He also compared the executive's role to the organization's nervous system, constantly monitoring and adjusting the internal environment to maintain that equilibrium. This requires strategic inaction just as much as strategic decision-making. The art, he argued, often lies in knowing what not to decide.
This is an incredibly powerful idea for efficiency. He detailed 4 decision pitfalls that executives must strictly avoid because making them erodes credibility and wastes cooperative energy.
Okay, let's go through them.
First, avoid deciding irrelevant questions. Questions that don't contribute to the organization's purpose simply waste time and distract the cooperative system. Second, do not decide prematurely. Acting before you have sufficient information often leads to wrong decisions that have to be corrected, and that undermines organizational faith in your judgment.
So patience is a virtue.
A critical one. Third, do not make decisions that cannot be made effective. If a decision is impossible to enforce or implement, issuing it just weakens the authority of every future legitimate command you give. It's crying wolf.
And critically, the fourth one.
Do not make decisions that others should be making. This is the core of delegation. If you constantly override or micromanage your subordinates, you kill their willingness to contribute, you stunt their professional growth, and you severely shrink their zone of indifference. The executive must ensure that decision-making occurs at the lowest effective level possible.
By avoiding these 4 traps, the executive clears the deck for their 3 core essential functions. The things they must do for the organization to function as a conscious, coordinated system.
That's right. These are the non-negotiables.
Okay, let's break down those functions. The first is the formulation of purpose and objectives.
This is the strategic function, defining the what and the why. It means taking the broad organizational mission, for example, be the leading phone company, and translating that into specific, actionable objectives for every department, every year, every quarter.
And this requires the proper delegation of authority.
It's essential. You have to ensure that specific tasks are assigned to specific roles, along with the corresponding authority needed to execute them. If you assign a task without giving the person the necessary authority, the power to command resources or people cooperation is doomed to fail.
Okay, so that's function one. What's the second?
The second function is the maintenance of organization communication. This is the infrastructure function. It includes the physical maintenance of the structure, drawing up the charts, setting the clear reporting lines we discussed earlier. But the most vital subset of this function is personnel.
The people.
The people. Maintaining communication means bringing in the right people, ensuring they understand the channels, and then managing the incentive structure to keep them contributing. This involves selection, training, performance assessment, and the judicious use of promotions and demotions. Barnard was particularly insistent that loyalty, as an ideal benefaction, was a vital trait to select for, as it sustains the organization through difficult times when material rewards might be low.
So if the first function tells people where to go and the second function builds the roads, the third function is the gasoline, securing essential services from individuals.
That's a great analogy. This is the hands-on daily execution of the incentive system. It involves the practical work of recruitment, ensuring high morale, continuous education and training, and effective supervision. It's the continuous active effort required to ensure the organization has the necessary fuel, the sustained human effort to achieve its purpose. You have to constantly nurture the spirit of cooperation, or the fuel just runs out.
When you combine those three functions, defining the purpose, maintaining the structure and people, and securing their service, you see how all-encompassing the executive role really is. And this brings us to Barnard's crucial, and I think often misunderstood, definition of success: organizational efficiency.
Right. And we have to reiterate this point clearly. Efficiency for Barnard is not merely profit maximization.
Which is how almost everyone defines it today.
Correct. Traditional management judges efficiency by the ratio of output to input. How much money did you make relative to your costs? Barnard defined organizational efficiency as the capacity of the system to offer enough subjective incentive, material, social, ideal male, to keep everyone satisfied and willing to contribute. It is the capacity to maintain that positive contribution satisfaction equilibrium.
Why is that definition so critical?
Because if the organization fails to be efficient in Barnard's sense, if people are deeply dissatisfied regardless of the financial output, they will leave. The system will lose its human forces, and eventually it will cease to exist. Efficiency, in Barnard's view, is the true measure of the organization's long-term survival capacity.
So you can be profitable in the short term, but deeply inefficient and doomed in the long term.
Absolutely. It happens all the time.
We've established the system, the motivation, and the functions. But what is the active ingredient that breathes life into this machine? Barnard called this crucial element leadership.
He did. He described leadership as the indispensable fulminator.
A fulminator.
Yeah, like the spark or the detonator that ignites cooperation. And he insisted that effective leadership requires a profound tension within the individual. They must be both a realist and an idealist.
Okay, what's the difference?
The realist side acknowledges the current constraints, understands the immediate friction, and recognizes the need for action even when outcomes are uncertain or messy. The realist handles the maintenance functions, the structures, and the systems.
And the idealist?
The idealist side provides the vision. The idealist is the one who pursues the overarching, sometimes lofty goals that may not be immediately achievable, giving direction and belief to the entire system. Without the realist, the organization just stalls in fantasy. But without the idealist, the organization loses its ability to inspire those ideal benefactions and descends into bureaucratic mediocrity.
To manage this tension effectively, he identified some specific qualities that a leader needs.
He did. He listed high vitality or energy, decisiveness, the ability to act even with imperfect information, persuasiveness, which is about clear communication and ethically selling the purpose, a deep sense of responsibility, that moral power we talked about, and strong intellectual capacity to be able to analyze these complex systems.
And these aren't just personality traits for him.
No, they are functional requirements for maintaining equilibrium and communication integrity across a vast, complex cooperative system.
So given all this, what is the lasting critique of Chester Barnard, and why is he still so fundamental to understanding management today?
Well, the primary criticism, which is valid, is that his key text, The Functions of the Executive, is notoriously abstract, dense, and difficult to parse.
It's not an easy read.
Not at all. Many managers looking for a quick how-to guide found it frustratingly academic and lacking in simple, concrete examples they could go and implement on Monday morning.
Did he know it was difficult?
Oh, yeah. Barnard was aware of this. His defense was basically that if you are truly theorizing about the complexities of large-scale human cooperation, a system involving economics, psychology, morality, and sociology, the resulting framework must, by definition, be abstract. Simple answers would have betrayed the reality he was attempting to describe.
And despite the difficulty of the text, his legacy is ironclad.
Completely. He succeeded in fundamentally dismantling the myth of the economic man, proving that the social and psychological health of an organization is paramount to its survival.
And his concepts, the contribution satisfaction equilibrium, the zone of indifference, the acceptance theory of authority, became the foundational building blocks for later, massively influential thinkers.
They really did. Herbert Simon, who won a Nobel Prize for his work on decision-making, expanded directly on Barnard's ideas, particularly the concepts related to the limits on human rationality within organizational settings. Barnard provided the intellectual DNA for modern organizational behavior and public administration. He gave us the definitive framework for thinking of an organization as a living, breathing social entity, not just a ledger book.
We've journeyed deep into the mind of Chester Barnard, the executive who refused to accept the status quo of command and control. To recap our key insights, remember that an organization is a cooperative social system built to overcome individual human limitations.
And that authority is not inherent in the manager's position. It is granted and accepted by the subordinate from the bottom up.
Right. And the executive's core job is managing that subjective contribution satisfaction equilibrium, using a vast toolkit of material, non-material, and ideal incentives to expand that critical zone of indifference.
It's a constant balancing act.
It is. Barnard gives us a vital lens for modern leadership, whether you're dealing with remote teams, matrix organizations, or the gig economy. Leadership today is about maintaining the conditions, the incentives, the communication, the moral clarity, so that employees choose to accept your directives, ensuring compliance is automatic rather than coerced.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you to consider. Barnard established that true organizational efficiency is measured by internal satisfaction and sustainability, not just short-term profit. If that is true, how many organizations today are mistaking short-term financial success for genuine efficiency? And if the zone of indifference expands with respect and ideal benefactions, what immediate non-material incentive could you introduce into your team this week to fundamentally reinforce the system of cooperation and ensure its long-term survival?